Imagine stepping outside at dawn. The wind cuts through anything you're wearing. The ground is frozen solid beneath your feet. Your breath freezes the moment it leaves your mouth, and the nearest water source is a sheet of ice you'll have to break just to drink. There is no furnace humming behind a wall, no thermostat to adjust, no heated car waiting to whisk you somewhere warm. This was daily life for Viking communities across Scandinavia during the depths of winter, a season that could last for months and turn deadly within hours for anyone unprepared. So how did they do it? How did entire families, entire villages, survive winters this brutal with nothing that we would recognize as heating technology? The answer isn't one clever invention. It's a whole system built from architecture, fire, clothing, food, and cooperation, all working together to keep people alive when the world outside turned against them. Let's start with the biggest problem: shelter. A structure built the wrong way could mean the difference between survival and freezing to death overnight. Viking builders understood this, and their solution was the longhouse. A typical longhouse was long, narrow, and low to the ground, built with thick timber frames and walls packed with turf, earth, or a mixture of both. This wasn't just about keeping rain out. Turf and packed earth are natural insulators. Layered thickly against the walls, they slowed the escape of heat and blocked the wind that could otherwise cut straight through a thinner structure. In some regions, archaeological evidence suggests roofs were built using turf as well, creating a kind of living, insulating blanket over the entire home. Inside, the layout mattered just as much as the materials. At the center of the longhouse sat the hearth, a long fire pit running down the middle of the main room. This wasn't a decorative fireplace tucked into a corner. It was the beating heart of the household, burning day and night through the coldest months. Smoke had to go somewhere, and here's where things get clever. Rather than a modern chimney, many longhouses relied on openings in the roof, sometimes combined with the natural draft created by the fire itself, allowing smoke to rise and escape while retaining as much heat as possible inside. The air near the roof would be thick with smoke, which is part of why activities happened lower, closer to the fire, where the air was breathable and the warmth was strongest. Now picture the layout from above, like a cross-section cut straight through the building. Sleeping areas and benches lined the walls, often raised slightly off the frozen ground. This wasn't random. Cold air sinks, and the ground itself could be dangerously cold to sleep directly upon. Raised platforms, sometimes covered in straw, wool, or animal hides, gave people a barrier between their bodies and the frozen earth beneath the home. And in many Viking farmsteads, animals weren't kept in a separate barn far from the house. Evidence from excavated longhouses suggests that in some regions, livestock were housed at one end of the same building where the family lived, separated only by a partition. This wasn't just convenience. Animals generate body heat, and that heat helped warm the shared structure, especially during the harshest stretches of winter. But a warm building alone wasn't enough. The moment anyone stepped outside, into the wind, into the snow, into temperatures the human body was never designed to handle unprotected, clothing became the next line of defense. Viking clothing for winter relied heavily on wool and animal fur. Wool has a remarkable property. Even when damp, it continues to trap air and retain warmth, unlike many other natural fibers. Archaeological finds and textile research indicate that Viking-age people layered wool garments, sometimes combining tightly woven outer layers with softer inner layers, creating pockets of trapped air that acted as insulation against the cold. Fur added another layer of protection, particularly for extremities and outerwear. Hats, mittens, and boots lined with fur helped prevent the kind of heat loss that could quickly become frostbite. Every piece of clothing had a purpose, refined over generations of trial and error in an environment with no room for mistakes. Surviving winter also meant surviving without fresh food for months at a time. Farms didn't produce much once the ground froze, so everything eaten in the deep winter had to be preserved in advance. This is where preparation became just as important as any wall or fire. Meat and fish were dried, smoked, or salted, methods that removed moisture and slowed the growth of bacteria, allowing food to last through the cold season. Some evidence points to fermentation being used as well, a process that preserved food while also making certain nutrients easier for the body to absorb, something that mattered enormously when fresh vegetables and fruit simply weren't available. Grain was stored carefully, often in raised structures or protected containers designed to keep it dry and away from rodents. Firewood collection was another race against the calendar. Long before the first snowfall, households would have needed to gather and stack enough wood to keep the central hearth burning for months. Running out of fuel in the middle of winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it could be fatal. None of this worked in isolation. A well-insulated longhouse meant little without a fire kept burning. Warm clothing meant little if there was no food to fuel the body through freezing days. Stored food meant little without shelter to protect it from the elements. Every piece depended on the others, and every piece depended on preparation that began long before the first frost. It's worth remembering that Viking communities were not identical across Scandinavia. Coastal settlements, inland farms, and northern regions each faced different conditions, and archaeological evidence suggests methods varied depending on local materials, climate, and resources. There was no single Viking winter survival kit. There were many solutions, shaped by many environments. What made survival possible wasn't a single piece of technology. It was an entire way of life, oriented around a season that could kill. Architecture, fire, clothing, food, and community weren't separate solutions. They were parts of one continuous system, built and maintained by people who understood, and better than most of us ever will, exactly what winter could cost them.